Welcome, my dear friends. It's great to see you again. In case we haven't been introduced, I am Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an enjoyer of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. And in this episode, we're going to be completing the dramatic reading of Zaira with Part 2. The lead short story from the Sword and Sorcery short story collection, Maidens and Mayhem, by Marinos Anagnostopoulos. Part 1 of Zaira saw the Padishah's army conquer Turman, but one of his most capable commanders, Prince Casimir, has fallen under the spell of a bewitching beauty. And surely nothing bad ever comes of two dudes who are really good at violence fighting over a woman. Am I right? So sit back but get used to being on the edge of your seat as we finish the sordid tale of violence and lust that is Zaira. The Vultures. When the world was milk and honey and the magic was strong and true, then the strange one came and the people knew that the chains were on. From his right side, Prince Casimir could hear men singing the harrowing songs of pain. Above him he heard the sound of vultures screeching with excitement as if circling a battlefield. On his left, the wind whispered softly in his ear. His lips were parched. He was covered in dust. Pain shot out from his limbs and all throughout his body. His neck was strained. He tried to open his swollen eyes. Everything was blurry. From the narrow slits he looked to his right. A long row of X-shaped crucifixes lined the road. Moans and groans chorused the valley of those that he could see crucified on wooden X's. He tried to remember what happened the previous night as he woke up to this nightmare. He had left his tent with treasures and walked directly to Zaira's tent. How he knew that she had her own personal tent or how he found it was beyond him. Some sorcery led him to her. He snuck up to the two guards guarding her tent and dispatched them with his blade. He then stepped inside the tent to find Zaira lounging on a tiger skin like a cat herself. She arose, startled. "Who is there?" she asked, brandishing a curved dagger. "It is I, Prince Casimir of mighty Ophir," he replied. "Prince Casimir, that is you." "None other." She dropped the blade and ran into his arms. "My dear prince, I knew you would come and save me from that monster. Oh, it is terrible. He forces me to dance for his dogs. He threatens to torment me if I do not do his bidding. He..." "Shh," said Casimir. "Shh. You're safe now. I won't let him touch a hair on your head. My prince, we must leave. If he finds you here, he will kill the both of us. Take me away now. We must leave at once before he comes and finds you." "I have brought you gifts, Zaira," responded Casimir, ignoring her desperate pleas. "These are tokens of my love." He opened a purse full of rubies. "We must go now," Zaira begged, ignoring the treasure. "You do not understand," he interrupted. "I have never seen a beauty such as yourself, and I have seen the most beautiful women that all of Mana has to offer. My men will be ready soon. We will ride away from here as soon as we can. But first..." He looked into her hazel eyes, and his soul blazed like fire. Full bliss enveloped his mind as he leaned down and kissed her sweet mouth. Eternity passed in that moment, as all around him disappeared, and he entered a dream. She responded with passion and melted into his embrace. The two became one in this dream. The dream did not last. They were interrupted by the noise of the Falcon soldiers rattling their arms as they entered the tent. The Falcon followed them in with the look of death in his eyes. His face turned redder than his beard and his turban. Then the couple broke their kiss and turned to face the crimson rage of the Padishah as his soldiers tore them apart. The Falcon's army marched along the road with the crucified victims of his recent conquest, crying out for water and death as they hung from above. The banners of the different companies fluttered past the crucified in a splendid array of colors, reminding the victims of who it was who had put them there. Most of the victims were of the nobility, the guard, and anyone that had thrown in their support with the upstart that had dared defy the great Padishah. At the end of the long succession of death hung Casimir. He had been beaten, whipped, and was now crucified. Hung up on his wooden X, Prince Casimir watched as the snaking ranks of the army approached his crucifix. His vision blurred from pain and exhaustion as he tried to make out the figures that approached. At the head of the column rode the standard bearer of the Falcon. Prince Casimir struggled to make out the red falcon on a white field flapping against the wind as it neared him. It reminded Casimir of who he had once sworn allegiance to and who had now put him in this miserable state. He made out the falcon behind the bannerman, dressed in his purple silks and his golden crown resting on his head. Suddenly his senses came to him. His vision cleared. Following the falcon was a litter carried by 4 slaves. Inside lay Zaira. She too had been covered in beautiful purple silks and adorned in all manners of jewelry, plundered from the ruins of Teraman, no doubt. A purple veil covered her face, but he could recognize her eyes as they looked at him. The falcon rode his charger up to him. He gave Casimir a look of disgust and spat at the foot of his crucifix. He turned his charger forward and moved along cockily as he motioned his slaves to follow. Casimir then noticed the glimmer of a tear rolling softly down the side of Zaira's eye as she gave him a look of tenderness and melancholy. The shining tear rolled down her cheek only to be lost under her veil. To the crucified prince, this tear was worth more than the glitter of all the treasures in the world. The falcon's troops dragged along the Termanian maidens that had been captured and enslaved by the Ophirians. They were identified by the green and gold bands tied around their arms, the proud colors of Ophir. So then what had happened to Casimir's men? One thing was for certain, whether dead or alive, they no longer possessed their slaves. The falcon's men jeered at Casimir as they dragged the chained beauties before him. "You tried to take our master's woman, so we take the girls of your men," they mocked as they ripped at the garments of the unfortunate girls. The army moved on, and Zaira grew lost among the patchwork of colors that made up the snaking column. A variety of warriors passed him by. Some showed pity, and others showed indifference. Onward went the savage riders of Sarkhan, who were masters of the horse and bow. Their faces were veiled with mail, and horns protruded from their helms. Their unfortunate she-slaves were dragged along behind them. Next came the short and stout Kal-Kajir of Shemai, with their halberds, crossbows, and their proud banner of a black chevron on a golden field. They marched forward with their blue-black beards dangling under face masks of steel. Next, a sapphire banner with a black panther fluttered towards Casimir. He looked down to see Mandros riding proudly on a black stallion beside the standard-bearer. He wore glittering plate armor with a blue surcoat and the panther pelt over his shoulder. On his head rested a beautiful helmet, with the designs of phoenix wings crafted into it, and a long white tassel protruding from its top and flowing down his back. He seemed pleased with himself. He must have crucified the usurper's guardsmen that had offended him further down the row of X's, thought the prince. At least that was what he had sworn to do. Mandros looked up at Casimir firmly as he rode past, and said nothing. Beside him was his chaplain. Grim was a steel-clad holy man with a skull painted on his face as he murmured prayers for the dying. The Kal-Kajir and Mandros' barbarian paramour followed. Then came Mandros' company of Archaean man-o'-wars who passed by adorned in steel and sapphire on their bodies, as the sun glimmered silver off the polished helmets on their heads. The chaplain halted at the end of the line of crosses and got off his mount. "I need to say a prayer," he declared. "For the dead?" asked Mandros. "No," replied the skull-faced chaplain. "For your soul." Prince Casimir's men were nowhere to be seen. Perhaps they were all crucified along with him. Perhaps they had all been slaughtered the night before, their souls gone to Yim while their blood watered the golden earth. It didn't matter now. Prince Casimir gasped in pain. He closed his eyes and saw Zaira. The tears she shed glimmered like jewels as she gazed upon him with the tenderness of her love. He could hear her calling his name. "Come for me," she said. "Come and save me." He fainted before the tail of the snaking army had marched past his cross. The vultures screeched their song of hunger above. The lion. Each day you hear the sand as it moves and whispers, "Come and sail on my golden sea. Maybe one day you'll be just like me, and that's free. But still your chains are on." The streets of Mirabar were filled with roving mobs, their menacing howls drowning out the panicked screams of their victims. Houses were looted, maidens were violated, and blood washed the streets red. Smoke danced gracefully around the soaring minarets and spires, like harem vixens trying to amuse their master, born from the flames that burned the beautiful palaces in the fiery inferno below. Wagons full of treasures were carted out of the ravaged city, followed by beautiful maidens crying tears of sorrow as they were dragged forward by their new lords. The sun was setting behind the crumbling walls, giving the city a final look at its withering life, before the moon rose to illuminate what remained in its ashen grave. Prince Casimir entered the throne room, bloody saber in hand, as his men dispatched any resisting guards around him. There he found the falcon, trembling as he huddled beside his throne. His skin turned pale as he cowered in fear. Prince Casimir remembered how he was awakened by Mandros' barbarian wench cutting the thongs that held him to the cross. "Sit still," she complained in her foreign accent as she worked at his bonds. Mandros looked up at him from below, beside his dwarf companion, the skull-faced chaplain, and his battle-hardened Archaeans. Mandros' helmet was off, and his dark hair draped his shoulders. "These silks will be ruined," complained Thuvia as she loosened a bond with her blade. "Listen to you," mocked Mandros, "complaining about your silks when you were a Termanian slave wench just weeks ago. You promised the moon and the stars," she continued. "Instead, I get a mouthful of dirt." "You'll get a mouthful of me," Mandros responded, giving her a cocky wink. He turned his attention to Casimir. "You paid for my services when you sent me gold and jewels." The Archaeans, adorned in steel and sapphires, all nodded in agreement. "Your men are safe. I have been in contact with Turga and have promised him your freedom. Now, let's see if the Lion of Ophir still has some fight in him." They carried Casimir back to where Miago and his Ophirians were skulking. The Archaeans left him there and then marched north, away from the decadent cities of Yimza. They had had enough of blowing dust and ubiquitous treachery. It turned out there was a mass mutiny amongst the host of the great Padishah. His barbarian mercenaries had quarreled over loot. The Falcon played judge and picked a side, which led to an insurrection from the losing party. Many other disgruntled companies joined in, and the army fell apart. Some companies battled each other, while others retreated back to their homelands. A few remained loyal to the Falcon and marched east with him towards Mirabar. Mandros and his Archaeans were amongst the dissatisfied companies. They decided to go before more trouble found them. Prince Casimir recovered over the last year and raised a banner of vengeance. His lion banner flew high as warlords answered his call to arms. The disgruntled barbarian companies were among the first to join his horde. Many of the warlords and mercenaries had felt cheated and were disgusted with the Falcon. They were more than eager to join the prince on his march for revenge. Balthas the Black and his red spears joined enthusiastically. All of Ophir joined the campaign. With their sacred lion head painted on their bucklers, they marched forth and crushed those that dared make a stand before them. Prince Casimir was named the Lion of Ophir as castles were toppled, cities were burned, and a trail of blood and destruction led from Casimir's cross to the palace of the Falcon. "Zaira!" had been the lion's roar as he charged into the fray. His horde enthusiastically adopted the name as their war cry. The savage barbarians that joined his retinue bathed themselves in the blood of the civilized world. The armies of the Falcon had been crushed, and the gates of his capital been broken. Vengeance was almost complete. Miago entered the throne room, following his prince and Turga leading the personal guard. Those around the lion had noticed a change come over him ever since he had been taken down from the cross. He was no longer the dashing young knight that young boys would be told high tales of to stir their imaginations during cold winter nights, nor was he the handsome young devil that women of all statuses, from humble tavern wenches to noblemen's daughters, would dream he might sneak into the rooms and steal them away. Prince Casimir had become a brute. He had washed the realm in crimson blood and was thirsty for more. The whole time he spoke about Zaira. His men believed her to be a symbolic gesture. She was the most cherished prize of the Falcon to be taken away from him, just as he had stolen her away from Balthas, just as Balthas had stolen her away from the usurper of Terman. She was a symbol of power to them, and they believed whoever possessed her was meant to rule over others. Miago knew better. The change of Casimir's character was not born on the cross. No, it was from before. Miago saw his cousin transformed that night in the Falcon's tent when Zaira performed her enchanting dance. Some kind of spell had been cast on his cousin that turned him into her slave. Miago saw how Casimir reacted every time he heard her name. He remembered his stupidity that night when he snuck into Zaira's tent, and Turga had rounded up their men to flee before the Falcon poured his vengeance on them. Prince Casimir had lost all sense of reason and was ruled by his violent passions. His passions, Miago knew, were driven by her. Miago had attempted to confront his cousin about his current state. The prince, however, was easy to anger if challenged about her, and Miago always backed away to avoid losing his bald head. The lion had slain Balthas over a quarrel which Miago was certain was about Zaira. His red spears were crucified. The army did not complain. They went on. Castles had been toppled to ruins. Ancient cities had been turned into lakes of blood and fire. Zaira's name was cried out as people died and palaces burned. A female figure on a violet banner now waved beside the golden lion of Ophir. She had become their goddess, a goddess of war, with an insatiable thirst for blood. This was madness, and Miago had become part of it. The lion approached the falcon slowly, his fist gripping his saber tight, his teeth clenched and sanguinary fire in his eyes. The falcon quivered before him, a broken man and a pitiful sight compared to the glorious warrior that had united the Yimsa realms under the weight of his boots. He was fatter than ever, as he had given up the hunt and any of the martial arts that keep a warrior fit and disciplined. Purple robes covered his decadent new form, and a crown sat on his head. He hadn't bothered to put on armor as the lion's hordes attacked his city. He was a deplorable version of the proud conqueror that had rode forth, bringing hot fire and cold steel to all that dared oppose him. The falcon had lost his feathers. He pathetically tried to bargain and beg as the lion approached. "I will give you everything. I have gold. I have rubies and jewels hidden. I have more riches. Back at Termon, it was all misunderstanding. You have now earned your justice and proved yourself the better man. Take my crown. You are now the great Padishah. The Yimsa realms are all yours. Please, spare me," the falcon groveled. "Where is she?" demanded the lion. "Where's who? What are you talking about?" "You know exactly who I'm talking about. I have treasure stashed away in forts and caves. They could all be yours." The falcon's pleading broke as the lion struck his head with the hilt of his saber. Blood trickled down the falcon's face, blinding his eyes. "Where is she?" the lion roared. The falcon screamed in pain. "Where is she?" demanded the prince as the falcon tried to regain his composure. "You mean Zaira?" asked the falcon. "You ask about Zaira?" "Yes," said the lion, grabbing the falcon by the collars and lifting him up to bring him face to face. "Where is she?" he asked again, staring the falcon in the eyes. The expression on Balthazar's face suddenly changed. Fear seemed to leave his eyes as they grew in madness and astonishment. Miago noticed movement behind the curtain by the side of the throne. Two hazel eyes watched what was proceeding in fervent excitement. "You did all this for her?" the falcon continued. "You murdered thousands and drenched the earth in blood? For Zaira?" A smile broke across the beaten man's face. He began to laugh. "You did all this for her? I thought I was her fool," he mocked. "You did all this for a woman. You didn't conquer me. Zaira conquered you." He continued to laugh like a madman until the lion, having enough of his mockery, ran him through. The falcon collapsed to his knees, looking down at the blood covering his hands as he tried to cover the wound. He looked up at the Prince of Ophir, blood dripping out of his mouth. "You did this for Zaira," he said as he spat out more blood and collapsed into death's cold embrace. The lion hacked down at him with his saber. He was filled with hate and animalistic fury such as was believed to be alien to a civilized man. When he finished, he stood there, panting, drenched in gore. He looked down at the mess he had created in disgust and spat on it. Suddenly, the scarlet curtain beside the throne moved aside. Zaira revealed herself, beautiful as ever. Bedecked in rubies and jewels, she wore a girdle of gold with a cloth of crimson flowing between her legs, mimicking the blood spilled by the lion's blade. A flimsy vest of matching colors covered her top. She was breathtaking. She ran into the lion's blood-drenched arms. "My prince, you came for me," she said and kissed him. He pulled her into his arms. He said nothing as he drank kisses from her full red lips. Casimir halted his movement of bliss and bent over to pick up the falcon's bloody crown. "You will be my queen," he said as he placed it on Zaira's head, blood dripping down her gentle face. He looked her in the eyes. "You are so beautiful." She fell into his arms, and he held her tightly. Miago watched their bloody embrace. The falcon's blood from Casimir's gore-drenched hands blended in with Zaira's crimson garbs. It was a grisly love scene. The couple embraced tightly, as if becoming one. Suddenly, over Prince Casimir's shoulders, Miago noticed Zaira's dark, hazel eyes looking straight at him as his cousin squeezed her in his muscular arms. She looked at Miago like a hungry tigress glaring at her prey. Her eyes were big, beautiful, and dark. He had never seen such eyes. What enchanting eyes. His fist clenched his sword tight as it quivered in his hand. Beads of hot sweat rolled down the side of his bald head to wet his beard. Her eyes could see his sweat. They could see him breathing harder. His heart began to beat faster as he grew lost in those dark, hazel eyes. "She must be mine," whispered Miago in complete astonishment. He had no control over the words that slipped out of his mouth. Turga heard his deadly declaration and stared at him in horror. "She was to be his?" Zaira shot a quick wink at Miago as Prince Casimir took her away and disappeared behind the crimson curtain. And that concludes my dramatic reading of Zaira. So as it has ever been, since the history of the world began with a man and a woman, so man stands bewitched. More physically powerful, perhaps intellectually more so as well, but vulnerable to that secret power that women have over men. And I don't know what your opinions are, my dear, dear friend. I wouldn't have it any other way. The mysteries of life are most intoxicating and fascinating. It's what gives us passion and desire. How bland life would be without it. So if you enjoyed this reading, I do enjoy when people like and subscribe. And when y'all leave comments, I do enjoy reading those and respond to all of them. If you too would like a copy of Maidens and Mayhem, because there's a lot more gold in here, believe me, it's available on Amazon right now. And if you want a signed copy, those are available directly from Marino himself. And we'll have his contact information in the description and in the closing slide. Well, my dear, dear friends, as we part for now, I wish you nothing but the best.